Hello everyone, and welcome to the first ever review from Apartment 11 Gaming. Apartment 11 Gaming is a gaming news review podcast studio that all has to surround about different types of games, from video gaming to board gaming, miniature warfare, D&D, everything that we cover. We'll provide reviews. We have a D&D podcast where we podcast some of our sessions, and the general idea is to promote more gaming awareness, review things in an objective way, and the first thing that we're going to cover in our first video is a rather hot subject. So I'm going to do my best to be as objective as possible and talk about pros, cons, and give just a little bit of personal reaction. And it's the hot subject today, of course, is the Age of Sigmar, which was just released by Games Workshop. Warhammer Age of Sigmar is the next installation of the Warhammer Fantasy IP, which, as it stands, I believe is actually kind of the original Warhammer Fantasy IP, has been sold, bartered, or traded off to the Total War studio, since they are now making Total War, Warhammer Total War. And Warhammer Age of Sigmar is the new IP. Everything's changed. It's no longer Warhammer Fantasy. You check the Games Workshop page, you check everything, it is Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And in the new Warhammer, everything is based around these realms. And the God King Sigmar has sent down his Stormcast Eternals to fight the Gore Tide of Khorne and to free the peoples. The game itself and its rules and everything is mainly what we're going to review. The storyline, as it stands right now, is of course not very fleshed out. It is a new game. It was just all the rules and everything were just given freely on Saturday, and we'll cover that as well in the review. And as a whole, the game is still kind of finding its feet. It's been out for maybe a total of, Saturday was when everything was released, so Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 3 or 4 days. And of course, there's already been a slew of videos dropped about this, but I wanted to give it time. I wanted to stew. I wanted to watch some of the other reviews and not do a knee-jerk reaction. That's not what we're going for at Apartment 11. What we're going for is a far more overarching objective view. So let's talk about some of the rules we've seen and the general gameplay as it plays out. The game's far more simplistic. Its barrier to entry is way lower. So the general idea of the game is you can play with as little or as many pieces as you want. There's not any sort of points or composition style, except for each of the war scrolls has these things called hosts, and the hosts are different ways that you can set up your army to get different bonuses. And if you have the units that are explained in this host, you get this bonus or that bonus. So everything is way more simplified. It is a 4-page rule set. That is both a pro and a con, of course. If we're looking at it objectively, you are easily making the game a lot more open. Anyone can join. Anyone can play. It is easy to understand. It is straightforward. The game actually learns really quickly. And for any Warhammer game, that's like a first. I don't know. I've played Warhammer, of course. I'm a diehard Warhammer fantasy player. I have been for decades. Warhammer 40k I play, but not as much. But the barrier to entry, not even monetarily, just by rules, has always been a big issue with Games Workshop games, and Age of Sigmar changes that greatly. By rules, by money, all the rules are free, all the codexes or the war scrolls for the different units, as they're called, are free, and you could play it in like, you could set everything up and be ready to go pretty much in 20-30 minutes, and the monetary barrier for entry is way lower. My general rule to anyone that was being introduced into Warhammer, as I said, you generally are talking $200 to $300 seed money to start even the smallest army. With Age of Sigmar, that's not the case. It's you're talking as simple as a $35 investment to get one unit, and now you can play, and that's it. You're straight up ready to play. So that barrier to entry, it's a great pro in that level. The con on the opposite side, is that it has a low barrier for entry, and you don't have the order and the composition that normally comes with like even a slightly higher barrier of entry by rules, not even monetarily. Like the monetary barrier of entry is a perfect pro for this new gaming system. I think that it is a wonderful move by Games Workshop. I think it is a good way to attract new players, rather than some people would say holding a knife and asking for all the money before you even get a chance to play the game. But the rules being so low on a barrier of entry make the general game feel lackadaisical, unrefined, too open. Because it's very nice to have an open rule set. It is to where you can kind of build your own stories and do your own thing. But when they're as open as they are in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, you have an issue. And we're going to touch on this again later on when I get more into that point. But yes, barrier of entry, way lowered. Good on you, Games Workshop. The communication on the release seems to be the major issue. There's been, of course, questions asked of Games Workshop since. They were at Forge World. They had a rep there. Some questions were asked, and they were answering candidly for once for Games Workshop. They were straightforward in saying what was going on. If they had done this before they released Warhammer Age of Sigmar, if they had answered some of these questions before the release, I think you wouldn't see as big of an issue, because in the main news for this release is that it's caused a huge chasm between the Warhammer community as a whole. And it's caused this kind of name-calling fight. You have the old hammers, and you have what are called the Sigmarites or the fanboys or whatever you want. And there's kind of a fight. There's the legit battle going on between the two sides. I'm trying, of course, to remain as optimistic and objective as possible in the situation. I have my own reservations and trepidations, but that in covering what the release itself has done it's not really important. So this chasm has formed mainly because the new Warhammer Age of Sigmar does a couple rather unique things that to the old hammers, as I'll call them, and I don't mean that derogatorily, I'm just going to use that as a way to separate the two sides. The old hammers don't see the strategy that they've always loved about Warhammer Fantasy. They don't see the regal block formations, because that was all changed. Bases don't matter anymore. So there's no block formation infantry, there's nothing. Everything's measured off the model. The bases don't matter. So it is kind of more of a skirmishy feeling game, because you don't march in these block formations. Ranks don't exist anymore. All that is gone. Movement is not as huge as it used to be. You could win or lose a game off of one failed facing arc, and now in the new Warhammer Age of Sigmar, you can move any direction you want, when you used to just have to move in the direction your unit was facing, and if it wasn't facing the right direction, you had to wheel or reform it. So you lost a lot of the strategy that the old hammers know and love from all the other editions. Now, one thing to be said is that there are errors on both sides of the argument, for sure. 8th edition even had its fair share of issues, a large number of issues, that many of the tournament organizers themselves, the Swedish comp, the US Masters, they all comped their own rules and adjusted things for their tournaments. So it's not to say, and a good number of the old hammers are owning up to that 8th edition wasn't perfect, but it was still more strategic than the new Age of Sigmar. Now, on the converse, there are certain levels of strategy that I believe are being missed by the old hammers. For example, a lot of people are kind of missing, and I've been watching a lot of battle reports, I've been watching reviews. There's some really great things out there, which I'll mention later on in this video, from different YouTube groups and everything like that. But a lot of people are missing the fact that you can move out of combat. Every battle report I've seen so far, once people get in combat, they just stay there and beat on each other until one side's dead. No, everyone thinks that you're locked in combat, that you can't move. But you can. There's no rule saying you can't move out of combat. There are rules saying that you can't end your movement within 3 inches or whatever. If there's an enemy within 3 inches, you can't move, but you can retreat. And to retreat, your entire unit has to end outside of 3 inches. So if you're able to move your unit, if you're realizing that you're losing this combat, and your units are dying, and you remove the ones, you assign the wounds to where the ones that are left are able to, on your turn, move out of the combat, you've retreated. So depending on the unit you're using, a cavalry unit, for example, a cavalry unit could easily peel from combat. Charge in, do run round of hits. If it looks like it's not going to go, peel and reset. All these kind of things are all possibilities that I think are being missed. Additionally, another strategy that a lot of people are, I think, kind of taking for granted is the summoning aspect. And it seems to be very overpowered right now. People can, especially for the demon army, like it can summon anybody. A herald can summon another herald. But what I think is important to know in the way the rules work and everything is that the war scrolls themselves, the summoning ability is under the war scroll for the specific unit, not under the war scroll for the herald itself. So generally, since that rule is attached to that unit, let's say that we're talking about bloodletters, since it talks about summoning on the bloodletters war scroll, you would technically need to have the bloodletters on the field for that ability to be applied. So if you just brought a herald, all you could do was summon more heralds because you wouldn't have any other unit to apply the spell to the herald. I think that's something that maybe I'm interpreting wrong, could be FAQ'd, but the general gist is that there is a bit more strategy. Is simply just in the movement, the retreating option. You can fire your ranged weapons even while you're in combat at another unit that's not in combat. So there's definitely some strategy to be involved there. And there are certain abilities that activate within ranges of heroes and everything like that. So there's definitely strategy that can be attributed to this game that isn't currently there. Now again, on the converse, you have some rather unique and to certain people, understandably so, to certain people, ludicrous rules. You have the Skaven Fate Weaver first turn win. So the Screaming Bell, a Skaven staple. You roll 2d6, and it has different effects depending on what you roll when you ring it. Now, if you roll a 13 on 2d6, technically an impossibility. But per the rule, if you roll a 13 on 2d6, you win automatically. You just win the game. There's no questions asked. You just win. Now, what the Fate Weaver allows you to do, the Fate Weaver allows you to change one die roll for the entire game to anything you'd like. So technically, you could use the Fate Weaver to turn the 2d6 roll into a 13. So and when asked about it candidly, and the only reason I'm kind of laughing and I'm not, when asked about it candidly, Games Workshop said that was in there purposely. Now, you have a lot of the Sigmarites saying, well, that would just be a jerk move, and you don't have to play those people. And there is inherently a problem when you put that level of policing on the players. If you make this rule a possibility in your game, it's easy to know that there are going to be people that are going to do it, right? And technically that level of policing, that people saying, well, if you do it enough, no one's going to play you, even Games Workshop said it, is that you're making that policing part of the players, so you are literally giving a rule to someone so that if they use it, they're shunned. I agree, it's a jerk move to pull if it's in the rules, but gamers break rules and bend rules all the time. It is inherent to being a gamer. And to put out a rule to simply say that if someone does it, not a lot of people are going to want to play them is so, I don't know. I don't even know the word for it. I don't agree with that style. I think, even trying to be objectively, it's a way of shunning someone who's just following your rules and using a rule that you put into your game. Now, take that one aside. And let's talk about the player interaction rules. We're just going to call them player interaction rules. If you are running the Medusa for the Dark Elves and you are using it to attack somebody, you get to re-roll if your opponent looks you in the eyes at any time between declaring your attack and rolling. And then you have the Grail Knights. They get a re-roll. They get a +1 to their save if you hold up a chalice or goblet and say, "For the lady," in an epic voice. So the old hammers are feeling a little slighted. Like, Games Workshop's just giggling at them. Especially when you have, recently, the End Times came out, and there were these big books, and it was the end of the old fantasy world, and it was a big thing, and the books were not cheap, as Games Workshop isn't. But then, to like 3 or 4 months after the fact, suddenly everything's done. Just that's it. We released all these books, you bought all these books, you bought this End Times, everything, all these rule sets, and now they're done. And now it's just Warhammer, the Age of Sigmar. And by the way, those old units you've been playing with for decades, for the lady. Like, and there's even a rule for dancing. If you dance, you get a reroll, and if your opponent dances with you, you get another one. Like, it makes me laugh, but it understandably incenses some of the community. So all this has caused this chasm, and I think it can be mended. I think that there's one thing that could have solved all this Age of Sigmar hubbub, and that would have been communication from Games Workshop. Now, Games Workshop has renownedly been terrible at communication, so it's a bad, thing to begin with, but they started communicating candidly after the release. And that's still semi-par for the core for Games Workshop, but the benefit, or the one amazing thing, is that they actually communicated. They answered questions. They gave us some candid answers. And if that whole communication had come out a day before the release on Saturday, so people had time to swallow a bit and say Games Workshop is saying that these new ludicrous rules are more for a celebration or a send-off to the old models and the old pieces, which is what their response was, that these things are kind of a, yay, hey, let's have fun, let's celebrate these old models that have been in it for years and have a little fun with it. If that had been out a day before, a week before, I think that this whole thing could have been avoided, because everybody would have had a heads up. People wouldn't have been reading the rules and going, what is this? What happened to my game? They would have had a lot more warning. More so because they've even mentioned that they're going to be releasing advanced rule sets and potentially scenarios that allow you to comp or have point costs for your armies, which there currently are none. Now you can just play as many models as you want versus as many models as you want. And it's either you wipe out your opponent, or if you outnumber them, they get a sudden death thing, and you have to outnumber them by 33%. So it's very, very simple. When I say a 4-page rule set, that's literally what it is. And as someone who's, of course, familiar with the weapon that is the Warhammer battle books, it was a shock. It was a shock. Now that being said, I encourage people to try the game. I encourage people to watch the videos. I think that there could be something here. I think Warhammer Age of Sigmar is at least this one. I think this is everyone keeps using the term, and I'm going to adopt it. I think this is a beta test. I think that what we have here is a good start, or what could be considered a potential good start. And yeah, what could be considered a potential good start. I think that with all of that in mind, if what they say is true, and they're going to be releasing an advanced rule set and scenarios with comp and all that kind of stuff, that this could grow into being a good new Warhammer. Now, let's take Games Workshop out of the equation right now, which is rather hard to do, and let's look at the community. Now, there are a lot of people saying that they're still going to continue the 8th edition, and that community will continue playing, and that perhaps the US Masters or the Swedish Comp will come up with their own rule set for Warhammer Age of Sigmar for their tourney community. Now, I wish that could be so true, and it's not because I don't want to play Age of Sigmar. It's not because I'm a try-hard 8th edition person. It's more because such a community holding together and doing such a thing in gaming is so amazing. I love it. But when we talk about a game that is no longer supported, 8th edition, 7th edition, all Warhammer Fantasy, okay, because Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer Age of Sigmar are two different things. When we talk about Warhammer Fantasy, it is now officially a dead game. and that's the big news. That's really what the big news in this is that Warhammer Fantasy is a dead game. The 30 plus years, 40 years, whatever, that people have been putting into this game, it's done. It's over. Fantasy is no more. Warhammer Age of Sigmar is the new now. And when a game goes dead, when it loses its support, in steps what's called attrition. Mainly because no matter how tight knit that community is, and how strong it is, and how wonderful it would be to see maybe an 8th edition community continue, even in the tourney centers, your new player recruitment just isn't there. Your game's dead. To enter the game, you have to go to eBay to get the rules. You can't get it. It's not supported. Games Workshop's not releasing anything new for it. There will be no change into those armies. And 8th edition was starting to dwindle as it was anyway, if we're being honest in the reporting, right? There were great tight-knit communities, but it was dwindling. 40K was the new now, the new WoW. And that attrition will eventually end that community. And it will turn into 2 to 4 mates playing in their basements or in their garages or their game rooms or their man caves or lady caves or whatever. Everyone is going to eventually break down to 2 to 4 players, then 3 players, then 2 players, then none. Warhammer Fantasy is dead, and I think that's what this video is really focusing on, is more the fact that with the introduction of Age of Sigmar, one hobby ends. And what's new needs to be understood, looked at objectively, and not compared to 8th edition, because there's no comparison. It is a brand new game, and the old Hammers and the Sigmarites need to understand that there's no comparison. You can't compare. It is not called Warhammer Fantasy anymore. It is Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Games Workshop has straight up changed it. And to compare it is to do a disservice, unfortunately, to both games. And fortunately, it's to do it. You don't want to disservice these games. They're 2 separate entities. There's no comparison whatsoever. The only comparison is that currently in the Warhammer Age of Sigmar, all your old armies from Warhammer Fantasy have their own war scrolls, and that's the only comparison. Some of the names are still the same, but even that's going to be changing. It's not going to be the orcs, it's going to be the oruks. It's not going to be the wood elves and the high elves and the dark elves. It's going to be the elves. And all that is changing. So we shouldn't compare. We should take them as 2 separate games and go from there. And if we're looking at Warhammer the Age of Sigmar as its own standalone game, which is what we should, and we should just completely forget that 8th edition existed, at least for judging this game. It is a simple, straightforward, easy to understand, cheap to enter, free rule set, miniature war game. Now, that all being said, in its current inception, it lacks substance. And that is an objective view. That is not me trying to be old Hammer. I have pulled my old Hammer side out. I have looked at this game. I have watched battle reviews. I am signed up for another demo to run it this weekend again, and to see how it plays and everything like that again. But it lacks substance, and it is only a 4-day-old game, so we have to keep that in mind. We have to keep in mind that Age of Sigmar has only been out for 4 days, and to judge it too harshly right now is wrong. But at the same time, it's kind of a lackluster start to the general populace. Now, there are people that are loving it, absolutely loving it, and power to them, great. You're just going to get a different type of player. Now, that's not bad. It's not bad to get different types of player and draw in a larger crowd. It's certainly not bad. It's good for a business. But you have some people that have put time into the hobby that was just killed, and they feel lost. And that's still something to consider. To be dismissive of the old Hammers in straight dismissive. Now, there are people that are saying some rather incensing things, but to say like, oh, it's a new game, you just need to get over it. I myself just said that it's a new game and you can't compare. There's a difference between you can't compare and you need to get over it. You have people that have sunk thousands of dollars, thousands of hours, everything, especially some of your tourney players, into these armies, into this hobby that has literally just been killed without warning, really. Like, there were rumors released, but if Games Workshop had said something, it would have made it better. It would have made this release a lot smoother. Even some of your old hammers, they could have raged and gotten it out of the way and just been like, no, that's it, this game's not for me. Rather than sitting here and waiting and clicking something on Saturday morning just to see it. It was the method. It was the method. And now that you have these people who have lost their hobby, there is understandable anger, I think. But that does not give the old hammers carte blanche to insult Sigmarites, right? So let's come back to Age of Sigmar. It has great potential to be an easy to understand, low barrier to entry, free rule set, miniature war game. It has great potential. When you compare it to similar counterparts to what it is now, Warhammer Hordes, old Mordheim even, it currently fails to stand up. I hope that that will change. I truly do. But our general view right now is going to be that Warhammer Age of Sigmar is a good low barrier to entry, free rule set, miniature war game. But is failing to deliver the level of fun that Games Workshop has been known to deliver. Thanks for hanging out and listening. Feel free to comment below. Like the video. I will also put a link to Apartment 11 Gaming's Facebook page, where we post a lot of when people are streaming, and links to our podcasts. Please feel free to leave comments, questions, concerns down in the video. We will do our best to reply. And thank you very much for listening.